Next on Newsmax Prime, is America abandoning the faith of our fathers? Shocking new numbers show a decline in Christians in the U.S. Richard Land reacts. Then, if imitation is the sincerest form of flattery, the 1994 House Republicans are receiving it from an unlikely source. The left prepares its own contract with America. We'll discuss. And Congressman Mo Brooks battles against a backdoor to amnesty. Newsmax Prime starts right now. Good evening. Welcome to Newsmax Prime. I'm J.D. Hayworth. Thank you for spending part of your Tuesday with us. Of prime interest tonight.
We're living in a world that is changing, and it is frightening to see how quickly the world is changing. And I think we're going to see real persecution of Christians and Jews in the years to come.
Reverend Franklin Graham on America's Forum last year discussing the changing landscape religiously in the international community and here at home. And today, new numbers about Americans as Christians in decline. According to our parent website, Newsmax.com and the Pew Research Center, America is becoming less religious, with fewer people calling themselves Christians. In 7 years, the number of Christians dropped by 8 percentage points to a total of 71%. Joining us now, Dr. Richard Land, the president of the Southern Evangelical Seminary. Dr. Land, thank you for joining us here on Newsmax Prime.
Happy to be with you.
Richard, what is behind this decline, or would you take issue with some of these numbers?
Well, I wouldn't take issue with the numbers. I mean, it's clear that there's an overall decline in the influence of Christianity and in the number of people who are professing Christians of various denominational strains in the United States. Now, if you're looking for a silver lining in these black clouds, it is that among evangelical Protestants, who are historically the most conservative and the most orthodox of Christians, the actual numbers have gone up. The percentage of the population has gone down by 0.9%. But when you consider that the American population has grown, there are actually 2 million more people who identify themselves as evangelical Christians today than there were in 2007. And the same thing is also true of the historically black church, which declined from 6.9 to 6.5, which means they had an increase in absolute numbers. So the absolute numbers for two of the most historically conservative Protestant denominations in terms of theology are brands of Protestantism, evangelicalism, and the historically black church. The numbers that they're actually going up. They're just losing ground relative to the population. But mainline Protestants continue to implode. They've gone from 19% to 14%. It's hard to imagine that in 1960, 45% of Americans identify with mainline Protestantism, and now it's 14%, which shows you that when you go from the 10 Commandments to the 10 Suggestions, you lose ground.
Well, mindful of that, so many people are concerned, Dr. Land. One of my friends, a fellow believer, took a look at these numbers today, and he said basically it means we in the faith community are losing. You take a look at what's happening culturally, what's happening spiritually. Are Christians, at least in terms of this temporal world, coming up short?
Well, there's no question that we're declining in terms of influence. We're declining in terms of our percentage of the population. And if you look at the breakdown by generation, the number of unaffiliated, those are people who may still have a belief in God. Only about 30% of the unaffiliated claim to be atheists or agnostics, but they're no longer identified with any particular religion. That percentage goes up as you go down the scale from the silent generation to the boomers, and then to the millennials, and then to the Generation Xers. So as a percentage of the population, Christian influence is waning. And I think it shows the power of the popular culture. And, you know, frankly, I think the most practiced religion in America today, and it's practiced by a lot of Baptists and a lot of Catholics and a lot of other Protestants as well, is radical individual autonomy. myself, and me. And unfortunately, that ends up leading to a decline in religion, a decline in the influence of Christianity, when people are focused on self and self-gratification. And contrary to what Rick Warren said several years ago, it's not about you. Too many Americans still think it's about them.
Well, we take a look at your situation now, leading a seminary, training those to go into the ministry and reach the lost. There are a lot more people who, in the spiritual vernacular, we would call lost, or at least disaffected. How
Yes.
important is it going to be for America's seminaries to reach out with the eternal message of Christ?
It's absolutely essential. And that's one reason why I'm so glad to be at Southern Evangelical Seminary, because we focus on apologetics. And apologetics is a fancy word for that passage in 1 Peter that says, always have ready to give a reasonable explanation of the hope that lies within you. We're training Green Berets, we're training SEALs, we're training paratroopers to go forth equipped with the evidence to contend for the faith in the secular square. It takes a lot more faith to be an atheist or an agnostic than it does to believe in the God who created the universe, the God whose Son is the Lord Jesus Christ.
As you mentioned those attending the seminary, Dr. Land, it brings to mind the notion of a spiritual war taking place on this planet. Is there spiritual warfare that in part is behind the numbers and the decline we are seeing in this new poll?
No question about it. You notice I used the martial terminology of SEALs, paratroopers, and Green Berets for Jesus in the Lord's army. The Bible is very clear about this. The devil is described as the prince of the power of the air, the god of this age. And that means that he has influence and impact over every worldly philosophy, over everything that happens in popular culture. And there is an incessant struggle, a spiritual struggle going on between good and evil, between God and the devil. And as Christians, we need to understand that, and we need to help everyone else to understand that. We don't live in a morally neutral world. We live in a world where the devil is consistently and incessantly seeking to foment evil and to entice people to evil deeds and evil thoughts and evil speaking.
Looking back over our history, Dr. Land, there have been times where Americans underwent a great awakening spiritually. Can that happen again in the 21st century?
Yes, it can. With God, all things are possible. And I believe it can happen again. Normally when it happens in the midst of real crisis. It happens in the midst of real spiritual despair. And I can tell you the last time it happened in America was in the Great Revival of 1858, which followed the catastrophe of the 1857 Depression, which was even worse than the 1929 Depression, and the fact that people were very, very concerned about a real, honest breakup of the nation and a civil war over slavery. And in 1 year, 1 million people were added to the church rolls in America, 1 million people out of a population in the North of 26 million. It elected Lincoln, and within 5 years, slavery was gone.
A minute remains. Do changing feelings in society about issues like same-sex marriage play a part in the decline of Christianity?
I would say the reverse is true. I would say that the declining influence of Orthodox Christianity, what C.S. Lewis called mere Christianity, the faith of the Apostles' Creed once delivered to the saints, that the decline of Christianity and the decline of the practice of Christianity, as well as the profession of Christianity among American Christians, has led to the changing views on same-sex marriage and premarital sex and other things. Those are symptoms of a real heart problem in America.
Dr. Richard Land, Skyping in from Charlotte, North Carolina tonight. You heard what Dr. Land had to say. Do you agree? We'd love to hear your comments. Send them to me via email, Newsmax Prime at newsmaxtv.com. You can also find us on Facebook and Twitter. And these new numbers, what do they mean? That's a discussion fit for a panel, and it's coming up next.